Super. So, those big AI letters that were looming over us, they can probably continue here. We are continuing with our Founders series of conversations on the Banco Sabadell stage at 4 years from now. And indeed, our overall AI conversations at 4 years from now, because it's time to meet our keynote guest for this morning. He is, and I need to take a big breath here, co-CEO of Salesforce, former CTO of Facebook, co-creator of Google Maps, former chairman at Twitter, current chairman at OpenAI, board member at Shopify, and currently founder of AI startup Sierra. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Banco Sabadell stage here at 4 years from now, Barcelona, Bret Taylor. Hey, Bret. Good to see you.
Thanks for having me.
Grab a seat. It feels like we've got a proper Silicon Valley audience with the whoops and the hollers going on over there. I'm liking this. Welcome. You're a busy man. You've been around that Silicon Valley block quite a lot, it seems. How have you been finding MWC Barcelona so far, though?
It's been great. Going around here, there's a mix of hardware, a mix of software, and the thing that I just feel is every single conversation I think is rightfully about AI and how it's impacting the telecom industry. And certainly in my business, we work in customer service, customer care, a huge topic of conversation here. So it's been really fun.
Good. Well, 4 years from now, as I'm sure you know, is certainly a much broader audience than just the telecom sector. And I want to explore that a little bit more. We can think of this as kind of past, present, and future, but I want to start on the present, if we may. And you mentioned Sierra there, so let's go on to that, and then we'll retrace some of the steps in your journey. Now, of course, OpenAI has been well covered over the last couple of years, but Sierra AI, you've co-founded, you've recently raised 175 million, led by Green Oaks Capital, already raised 100 million from Benchmark and Sequoia, some big backing there. For anyone in the audience here who maybe hasn't come across what Sierra AI is doing, what is it, why is it, and why is it getting the backing that it is?
So at Sierra, we help consumer brands build customer-facing AI agents. I'm sure half the companies in this room are working on agents, plural. We like to say we work on agents, singular. We like to help companies build their agent, which is like their website or their mobile app, the one with their brand at the top that helps their customers consider a purchase. If you have a Sonos speaker at your house, the Sonos AI will help you debug problems. In the United States, ADT Home Security. If you have a problem with your home alarm system, an AI agent will help you fix it. So you can think of it as customer service, but we think of it a little bit broader. Our whole hypothesis as a company is that a company's AI agent will be as meaningful as their mobile app or their website in the future in building their digital experience. And if I could sit here on this stage 5 years from now, I'd love it where most of the branded AI agents you run into in the wild were powered by Sierra. That would be success for us as a company.
Okay, well, 4 years from now, I'm sure for you would be great, and it'd be great for our branding as well, if that's when you were back on the stage. Of course, when we think about and you might need to correct me here, but just thinking about, as a consumer, how I would apply, how I would engage with what you've just been speaking about there. Chatbots, customer service chatbots on websites certainly are nothing new, and with my consumer hat on, I've experienced those for maybe 10 years or so, and it's not been a great experience, as companies, like some of those you've mentioned there, of course, Sonos and I think Casper, AOL, Weight Watchers are also on your roster at the moment as well. As customers of those companies, we've used those chatbots, and it's not been a great experience. They haven't understood what it is that I'm typing. They've not tuned into my tone of voice. With what we're seeing now with large language models, with natural language processing, and indeed agentic AI, how are you going to convince customers to engage with these bots once again when we've already kind of figured out that they haven't worked for us?
It's the right question. I always like to say I can't see the audience at all here, but if you ask this audience, do you like customer service chatbots? Probably 0 people would raise their hand. Yep. We've basically been trained over the past decade that they suck. And they're largely put there to reduce costs on behalf of the company who published them. But I think for most of us, the first time we tried ChatGPT, we were blown away by how good it was. It understands nuance, sarcasm. If you whisper to ChatGPT advanced voice mode, it will whisper back. It can have a sense of humor. I think I always joke when someone asks me what's the difference between these AI agents and chatbots, I said well, AI agents actually work, and people actually like them. So I think it's a little bit like talking about the internet during the age of dial-up modems versus the internet in the age of broadband. Yeah, it's all the same protocols and technologies, but you couldn't have gotten YouTube without the advent of broadband, and you can't have AI agents without the advent of large language models. Fundamentally, this technology enabled the software actually understand nuance, actually understand very complex workflows. But in particular, the main technology that I think is interesting about large language models is reasoning. The word agent comes from agency, and that basically means we're affording the opportunity for software to not only follow rules, but make decisions, to think, if you will. And if you've played around with things like O3 or DeepSeek, you see these chains of thought, and you can actually see these AI agents almost thinking out loud in what they're doing. And I think this is very exciting. So I think fundamentally the way consumers will start to like them is they'll experience them and they'll be delightful. So the next time you talk to one of our agents and it's a good experience, hopefully you'll give the next one a chance, and I think that will just take time. In the same way, I think you develop trust, and that, I think most of the time now if I'm traveling with a phone, I don't even worry if I don't have a credit card on me, because I'm confident the payments will work. I probably 5 years ago would not have thought that. It's time, it's experience, and it's essentially trust with these technologies. But here's my hypothesis. I think in 4 or 5 years when we're back here celebrating hopefully Sierra's success, you will prefer talking to an AI than a real person. You don't have to wait on hold. It's multilingual. It's patient. There's no pressure to get off the phone. It has perfect access to all the systems to take action on your behalf. All these things are actually something that only AI agents can do, and so that's why I really think in the future, if you show up and you're like, I have to talk to a real person? What kind of brand is this? I think that's what the world that we're going to.
This fireside chat is about startup roots as well as AI horizons, and I do want to step back and maybe look at what you're doing with Sierra, but through the lens of the experiences you've had in the past. But I do have to mention you have a London office now too. I love London. I've lived in London, worked in London for the majority of my life, but I have to ask, why London?
Well, it's a really big moment for us, for all the entrepreneurs in the room, to be able to set up our first office outside of the United States is a really big milestone for us. So, I think every entrepreneur starts a company hoping to find product market fit, and I'm really grateful to our customers that I think we have. And we really want to be a global company. The benefits of AI are not limited to companies based in the United States. And so we already have a number of customers based in Europe, but I think there's only so much you can do over Teams and Zoom. And we want to be present with our customers and serve the European market, starting with the UK. So grateful that we're starting our first international office. I hope to be in the EU shortly thereafter. And fundamentally, we want Sierra to be a great platform for building customer-facing agents for every company in the world.
Let's see if we get a chance to chat global in a moment, but let's step back. So, look, I mentioned in my opening the sheer number of companies that you've founded, joined, led, are still on the board of, and I know I missed several out on the journey there as well. Now, from the outside, that might look like somebody who is restless, impatient, or just somebody who doesn't really like sleep very much. So was that an intentional? Have these been part of an intentional journey? And is there a way that you can join the dots between the different stages that you made all the way back from Marissa Mayer and so on? Has there been a common theme in here for you? Or has it been opportunist?
There's a great inventor named Alan Kay, who is credited with inventing the graphical user interface and a number of inventions. And there's a quote attributed to him that hopefully is correct. You could ask ChatGPT, but he says, the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And for me, that's been the motivating force in my life. When I left my job as co-CEO of Salesforce, just by coincidence, the next month ChatGPT came out.
Right.
And you can't be an engineer and use a technology like that and not become obsessed with it. And I immediately thought of the technologies that I'd experienced where I had a similar emotion. I remember in high school when I first got a dial-up modem and first accessed a message board. I remember when I first listened to my first MP3 streaming from my computer. I remember seeing Steve Jobs announce the iPhone on stage. That moment when he said it was a web browser, a phone, and an iPod in one.
Are you getting it yet?
Exactly. And in those moments, if you're a geek like me, you want to be a part of shaping that technology. You wanted, when the App Store came out, I wanted to build an app. I wanted to know what it was like. I wanted to understand the contours of that technology and the consumer experience it would generate. And so for me, when I experienced large language models for the first time in ChatGPT and DALL-E, which for most people were their first experience, I wanted to help shape the future of that technology for myself and for society, and I believe in the power of entrepreneurialism. I love this part of Mobile World Congress. I love being around entrepreneurs. I think the ability to drive people towards a cause through the power of creating a transformational company is one of the greatest ways to make change in this world. So you're right, I don't sleep very much. You're right, I'm very busy, and I wouldn't change it for the world. I think this is one of the most fun times to be an entrepreneur. If there's a thread, I think I've gone through larger companies, I've gone through smaller ones. Another quote actually from Steve Jobs is, "It's more fun to be a pirate than it is to be in the Navy." And I think right now it's pretty fun to be a pirate. And the reason for that is when these new technologies come out, a lot of the power dynamics change with the incumbents in the technology sector. If you look at the growth of the web browser as an example, certainly there were companies like Microsoft that were powerful before and after, but you also saw the birth of Google, of Amazon, of PayPal, of eBay, of Salesforce. There's so many others that essentially came to exist because of the web browser and the implications of that. If you look at the birth of the smartphone, you had WhatsApp, DoorDash, Deliveroo. There's a billion companies that essentially were created because that technology shuffled the deck of cards of the technology industry, and it's not the right of every incumbent to own these new markets. I think in this room right now, there will be a number of companies that become enduring brands like those that were creative natively around this new amazing technology of large language models. And it's because startups can adopt the technology with greater agility. They can adopt business models that incumbents don't have the privilege to adopt because they have to deal with their existing contracts and business models and investors and all these things. And essentially, that agility is what makes startups great. And I think right now, if you just look at the history of the technology industry, where it was the birth of the PC, the birth of the internet, the birth of the smartphone, and now the birth of generative AI and large language models, it is a petri dish from which startups are born. And so I think it's one of the most exciting times in history to be an entrepreneur.
To throw a third Steve Jobs quote into the mix there, creativity is just connecting things. And it's no technology really stands on its own and has impact. 5G doesn't do very much on its own. It needs some applications. And so taking, whether it's large language models and applying that to different areas. We've been chatting a lot in the last 12 months here in the 4 years from now circles around quantum. Around the kind of frontier technology and the way in which quantum, great, quantum plus AI, really interesting and really impactful. Let's talk about bubbles, Bret, because you and I, we're about the same age here. We've both seen bubbles before. We've seen the big bubbles, the dot-com bubble, the financial bubble. We've seen maybe some smaller bubbles as well. You can think of the blockchain bubble, the metaverse bubble. Maybe I'm stretching it a bit there, but you decide. But the thing about being in the middle of a bubble is it's tempting to believe that that bubble will never burst. So 2 questions. On your journey, what have you taken away from seeing bubbles inflate and experience rapidly unscheduled disassembly? And for our founders and investors who are here today, what's your perspective right now on the take that AI is in a bubble?
I think financial bubbles are complicated, and I think not all of the ones you mentioned are created equally. I think the AI bubble is real, i.e. I think there are many assets right now in companies that are overvalued based on the intrinsic value of the company. But I actually think it is most analogous to the dot-com bubble, which is where I started my career, and as you said, we're a similar age, so sort of the defining technology of our youth. If you look at the dot-com bubble, it certainly created a lot of excess. In the United States, there's companies like Pets.com and Webvan, which have become almost the canonical joke about excess in technology. They had Super Bowl ads and were out of business less than 2 years later, just to give you a sense of the level of excess. However, if you zoom out now 25 years later after the dot-com bubble burst, most of the largest companies, not just in technology, but in the world, were created in that era, including Amazon and Google. And then similarly, if you look at companies like Microsoft and Apple, the majority of Microsoft's value is in Azure, which is essentially created because of the growth in the internet. And then similarly, Apple, the birth of the mobile phone and their services business, again, technology's created since then. I think with the benefit of hindsight, the reason why the internet bubble was both a bubble, but also perhaps with the benefit of the hindsight, the excitement was warranted, is that essentially when you connect the world, you create a ton of intrinsic value. It opens up new business models, whether it's payment systems, financial services systems, commerce. It created new business models like software as a service. So I think looking at any individual company, you could say, yes, it's a bubble because this company is trading at a multiple of 2 trillion. That's clearly not warranted. But the fundamental principles of the economic value that it was created turned out to be true. It just turned out to be a lot more nuanced than whether Pets.com was a good business. I think the same thing will be true in AI. I think we will fast forward 10 years, 20 years, let alone 25 years. I think the areas of the economy that we think will be transformed by AI will be transformed by AI. I think it will create incredible value in the economy. I think we will actually unlock productivity growth in the Western world and many countries where candidly we need productivity growth and we haven't seen it for too long. Does it mean that every company building out a new data center or every infrastructure model company will succeed? No, I don't mean that at all. But I do think the hype is warranted. And so I am an optimist at the macro level. I think that everyone who's even the most ambitious, optimistic views of where AI is going, I believe in that. I also think we're in a financial bubble. I think that right now picking individual winners is incredibly difficult. And let's just take Amazon as an example. Amazon was a bookseller online. To say that it was obvious that Amazon would be the, $3 trillion company it is today, very few people could have predicted that. And there was tons of competitors. It was almost obvious at the time when the internet came out that, hey, people will buy stuff online. Does that insight mean you can pick Amazon as the winner? No. I think right now, will software engineering be transformed by AI? Absolutely. Is it obvious whether Cursor will be a winner or Microsoft Copilot? Well, that's a more nuanced decision. I think it's obvious that customer experience and customer engagement will be transformed by AI. It's up to us at Sierra to prove that we can be the winner in that space. So I think we are in a bubble, but I also think the excitement will be warranted with the benefit of hindsight.
Brings to mind another quote, doesn't it, whereby, was it Gates who said that we will overestimate the impact of a new technology in 2-3 years, whatever that time span is, but vastly underestimate its impact within a decade. And I think that's another way of expressing maybe some of your impact.
A much more concise way of saying what I just said, yeah.
But something you did say in there, though, you mentioned SaaS. And certainly for a decade or so, SaaS has been king. Now, the rhetoric now is that SaaS is, well, maybe dead. Satya Nadella predicted the end of the SaaS era as we know it. So, to quote Twain, have reports of SaaS's death been greatly exaggerated, would you say?
So let's give a brief history of software as a service. So the web browser was invented in the early 90s. And then, starting in the early 2000s, most famously Salesforce, but a number of other companies started delivering enterprise software through a web browser. And there was kind of a couple of innovations there. Number one was every customer of the product was in the same version of the product. So you weren't buying Windows 95 and Windows 98. You just went to salesforce.com and it just worked. And the same is true of all the other software as a service vendors. So it used to be the business model of software is you'd buy the new version every time it came out. But now that everyone was running on the same version of the software because it was delivered through a web browser, it also demanded a new business model.
Yep.
So we ended up with subscription-based business models. And I think the two were related but independent. Could be different business models for the software. You could end up paying once for a piece of software but using the same version in perpetuity. But they were conceptually very linked. And so you ended up with a new technological delivery model and a new business model in one. And as Satya probably alluded to, that has defined the past 20 years of at least B2B software. I think in the age of AI, we are going to enter a new era. If the word site was the noun for the web and the word app was the noun for mobile, the word agent is the noun for AI. And I think of agents as autonomous pieces of software that can actually do a job. And if you think about how you compensate an employee who does a job, is you pay them for a job well done. You pay your salesperson a commission. So I think in the age of AI, we're going to move from paying for the privilege of using software to paying for outcomes. You're going to pay for the code being written by a coding agent. You're going to be paying for the contracts reviewed by a legal agent. And at Sierra, our customers pay us for the cases resolved by our customer service agents. And I think in the age of AI agents, paying for outcomes is the natural and sort of secular way to pay for the software. In the same way, subscription-based software was sort of connected to the technological delivery model. And I think that really will flip the software industry on its head a bit, just because, candidly, most software as a service companies aren't quite as accountable towards those outcomes today. Yep. You really leave it up to systems integrators and customers to really handle that last mile, to really make themselves successful with the software that you've developed. Yeah. And I think that will be a positive thing. I hope that chief procurement officers and CIOs have a much more accountable set of software vendors around them, because those vendors aren't just throwing software over the wall and saying, good luck. You're actually saying, hey, you're only going to pay us when it works. And I actually think that will be a really positive step forward. And actually, I would say software as a service was already a more accountable business model than what preceded it. Yeah, yeah. And I think we're just moving towards better value and more accountability from software companies.
I recently had to empty my parents' loft, and I found a box. Microsoft Office, maybe it was 97, 45 3.5-inch floppy disks in there. And I remember installing those, and it took a very, very long time.
Do you want a funny story on this?
Go on, yeah.
So we had our first computer. It was an old Compaq running DOS, and I got a game called Wing Commander. Does anyone remember this game? I'm an old guy, so most people know. Well, it took up so much storage that my dad made me uninstall it every time I was done playing. So I would spend 3 hours installing it, play for an hour until I got kicked off the computer, and then have to delete it so my dad could do his work. Gosh. And I did that every weekend. That's how devoted I was to play that game. How far we've come.
Oh, I could spend all day talking about retro computing and 8-bits and 6502 processors, but that's another conference altogether. Look, before we wrap up, I really want to try and wrap up a bit about your experience as well. Because in the room here, we have a lot of very experienced founders, investors, and we have a lot of people who are right at the beginning of their journey. And the main difference between MWC, where you spoke yesterday, is the maturity of the company. You have worn multiple hats and continue to wear multiple hats. With Sierra, you are the founder. You have a startup, a very well-backed startup now, but with a very, very clear vision. Yet at the same time, you sit leading boards of some of the world's largest companies now in the digital space, at least. So what have been your reflections on the different natures of wearing those hats, the different behaviors, the different versions of Bret that you need to show up to bring to the table when you are in those different environments that might be helpful for our audience here, who also find themselves, as is inevitable, having to wear different hats as a leader and as someone rolling up their sleeves and getting stuck into the code with the rest of the team?
Yeah, I'll speak as an entrepreneur and then through the lens of myself as a board member giving advice to operators. I think as entrepreneurs, one of your greatest risks is to be a single issue voter. When I talk to an entrepreneur who's an engineer, often when she encounters a problem, the solution is always engineering. We're going to make a feature to make that customer happy. We're going to do a redesign to make our product better. When in fact, maybe you had a go-to-market problem. Maybe you had a partnerships problem. Maybe you had a leadership problem. When I talk to an entrepreneur who's a business development background, the solution is always partnerships. When in fact, maybe you have a product problem, maybe you have a technology problem, maybe you have an HR problem. I think the main responsibility we have as entrepreneurs is to every day and wake up and really from first principles say, what is the most impactful thing I can do to get my company from point A to point B? And the most uncomfortable thing is doing the things you're uncomfortable with. And so I view as a board member, often my job is to give advice. I don't think proverbially it's advice they don't want to hear, but to really have an outside-in perspective and say, hey, this is the problem I think you're not seeing because perhaps given your expertise, and every founder, no founder's perfect, we all have areas of expertise, this might be the place where you're focusing too much or too little. One of the techniques that I use as an entrepreneur is I wake up and I sort of do an exercise where I pretend I'm a board member giving myself advice and try to remove myself from the tunnel vision that you naturally get as an entrepreneur and say, are there things that I am uncomfortable working on or that aren't fun to work on that I should be working on? And I think that's one thing that I've gotten better on through my career, getting advice from people like Sheryl Sandberg or Mark Zuckerberg or others, where I've gotten that hard advice about spending time on people, on partnerships, on investors, on things like that. And I think most of the startups that I see that are myopically focused on just one aspect of their company are often their problems are self-evident, but they're not working on them. And I think that's probably the greatest lesson that I've learned the hard way as an entrepreneur.
I think that's a really, really important point, and I know we have to wrap up, but finding the space, particularly when you are a really, really busy period as a founder and so many things are happening at once and you feel as though you don't have the time. I've got people banging on my door, I've got an inbox filling up. Still taking the space, taking the time to take that step back. Great tip about being the board member, giving yourself advice, but you need to give yourself the space to do that. Listen, Bret, we are out of time for now, but thank you so much on sharing those insights about the journey that you're currently on, about the journey that you've been on, and the advice based on both of those that you have for our audience, our mixed audience of founders, investors, experienced first-timers here today. I wish you every success with Sierra. See you in London, and hope to see you here in 4 years from now.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Bret Taylor.
Yeah.
Thank you, sir. Very good. Yes, please do. Thank you. No, definitely that way there.